And it hits me, oh my gosh, this is that triangle.
You know, there's explanation for everything that occurred in the Rendlesham Forest incident that doesn't involve aliens at all.
It was completely silent. It comes right over our heads.
He saw a classic flying saucer really standing in the clearing.
He turned over to my father and held his hand, and he looked in his eyes and he said, "We're not alone."
Welcome to Podcast UFO for our live show. We're live every Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on podcastufo.com. During the show, feel free to participate live in our chat room. And don't forget to like us on our very active Facebook page.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. I'm Martin Willis, your host. Just a quick little announcement here. The Monday show that I've been doing, the Everything Else show, was kind of like an experiment. I wanted to see how that worked. I really enjoyed it a lot, the different topics and everything. Now, I'm not saying that I'm going to stop doing that altogether. I'm thinking of changing things around. The show's on hold for a while. And really, to be honest with you, I really kind of bit off a little more than I could chew because I've been extremely busy and it's been really stressing me out. So that show is going to change, and there may be a couple of other changes. Nothing bad, though, I don't think. So I should be making an announcement, I believe, next week. Our guest next week is going to be Jeremy Corbell. But tonight, coming up in just a minute, is Alejandro Rojas with the UFO Updates. And my good friend Lee Spiegel will be on. We're going to be talking about all kinds of exciting things, what's changed in his life and what's going on, what he's working on and all that. So I want to thank you if you support the show. If you would like to listen to full shows, you can for supporting us for only $2 or more a month. All that information's on podcastufo.com. If you want to watch us live, you can watch us on YouTube. That's at 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That's also on our website. And if you can't support the show, but you want to listen to the whole show, you can listen to it on the Dark Matter Digital Network. That's Thursday nights from 10 to midnight. And so that's it for me for right now. Alejandro, what's happening? How are you?
I'm well. How are you, my friend?
Good. So what is going on in the great state of the warm state of Arizona? We got snow.
Nothing.
We have snow here. Yeah.
I know. You know what? The other states are just in a terrible. The weather is awful. They're getting snow. They're getting low temperatures. It's horrific what's happening throughout the country in states other than those out south here, like Arizona, California. Yeah. I went to Florida not too long ago for a short period of time, just a couple days ago, and it was wonderful there. We had to connect through Colorado Springs, but I was able to witness the devastating coldness and the pain and the difficulty that can cause just in breathing or just functioning. Life is difficult in those situations. I'm glad not to live in Colorado in the winter anymore, that's for sure.
I know. I'm not a fan of snow anymore, especially after last year. Missing the UFO Congress because I had 9-foot snowbanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to. I'm not a fan anymore.
Yeah, that's why old people retire and we're getting old.
That's what it is.
So we move south.
I know. I hate to face that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So what's going on with in the UFO world?
With UFOs, there's a lot of stuff going on, and of course, it's just because of tabloids. I think I've talked about this before in the era of UK tabloids, and begrudgingly, I've posted more tabloid stuff lately because they actually are picking up on some good stories here and there, but it is far and few between. Otherwise, they're picking up on a lot of really silly stuff out there, and so if you see these links and these stories to kind of the more silly stuff, we just don't cover the goofy. In fact, there's this a big one that's kind of making the rounds. These UFOs over China Lake in California, and it's like this silver mirror finished kind of disc. Not even disc. It's hard to even describe kind of this object. Have you seen it?
You're not talking about the donut one, are you? Is that something else?
No, not the donut. That is something else. No,
Yeah.
this you'll run across
I haven't
it because
seen it
it's
yet,
getting
no.
bigger.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Mark D'Antonio, who does the photo analysis for MUFON, and some people in the Open Minds UFO group have looked it over and pointed out a lot of problems with these pictures. But I have a feeling that there's going to be more news about these because they're really catching on because they look spectacular. You know, it's in the desert, California. There's a helicopter in the background and this weird, mirror-like object. But it looks almost too good to be true. And the shadows and lighting is all wrong, where it turns out it is too good to be true. So there are a lot of kind of odd ones out there that just aren't panning out.
Now,
However,
when you say,
pardon
me, when you say it's too good to be true, what did Mark, did he come to have a conclusion of what this is?
Yeah, he had looked at them and he got high resolutions of all the images. And he felt it was a hoax also.
Wow.
Lots of problems with it. And one of the big things with him was the focus. So he's able to tell the focal range or, this technical stuff he does and was able to determine that it was BS. So it was a focal BS.
Hey, now does Dr. Bruce Maccabee still look at images?
He does.
Yeah.
He does once in a while. And I've seen him chime in even recently on a couple of things, but I can't remember what in particular, to be honest. I think it was on this Nimitz video, which actually I'll save that because, we've talked a lot about this Nimitz USS Navy sighting.
Yeah.
And we've got some stories from Robert Powell on our side about that. And Jeremy Corbell has actually worked on this a bit. So I'll let Jeremy talk to you about it next week. Yep. He's done a little bit of research. So it's a great case, but Bruce Maccabee did chime in on the video there. And Jeremy's probably aware of that. So I'll let you and Jeremy talk about that next week. Cool. Otherwise, this is kind of cool. So there's this group called the Data Duo. And they have a website. And essentially what they do is they work on data visualizations. They're able to take data sets and then make them really cool and interactive. And they've done this thing. It's these two people who work together. One of them, I hope I'm saying her name right. It's Pooja Gandhi, and the other one is Adam Crahan. And they do these challenges, these duo dares, and where they challenged each other with some data. And luckily, this last one, they challenged each other with UFO sightings. So there's a website called Kaggle that puts out data sets of information for these data cruncher people to kind of work with. And one of the sets of information they have is on UFO sightings from 1960 to 2014. So these guys made these really cool maps that show where all these sightings are. And you can actually roll over every single one of these data points, and it gives you information about that sighting. And they also have some more maps about the country and stuff like that. So they're competing to see who's his best. I like Pooja's, but Adam is getting more votes. And they have a map. Now, I do write a story this week about kind of how, this website Bustle covered it, and the data is misleading. So if you look at these maps, it looks like the East Coast and the West Coast gets a lot of UFO sightings. But as I've shown in the past when I've crunched these numbers, they correlate with population. So the more people you have, the more sightings you're going to get. So what I did is even posted a photo of the planet at night, where it lights up in certain areas, this NASA photo.
Oh, yeah.
Just to show, it looks almost exactly the same as their map, because where there's more people, you get more sightings. So what you have to do, what I like to do, and other researchers, is look at the data per population, because if you have more sightings per person, that means that's more likely you're going to have a hot spot. Wow. So I went to the Kaggle website, and I downloaded their information, and I figured out the per population statistics, and I did post that just to show that the states that appear to be where the hot spots are in a map where you don't do that are not really the hot spots. So just to show what really the hot spots were, Washington showed up on top, and then Montana, Alaska and Alaska, probably because they have small populations. But some of the regulars like Arizona, New Mexico, Colorado, those are kind of some of the states that are higher up than usual per population often. One of the reasons Washington, by the way, is at the top is that Kagel used NUFORC data, the National UFO Reporting Center data, which is located in Washington. And so more of the locals know about it, so most likely more of the locals report to NUFORC. NUFORC is ran by Peter Davenport. Have you ever had him on your show?
I have. Matter of fact, we've been communicating. He says he's stressed out, but a lot of times he has been stressed out, and he's getting a lot of those prank calls, which is really bugging him. I don't know how he's going to deal with that.
Yeah, luckily he provides his data very raw, and he's done a good job. He's gotten his data online for the longest, so that's where they got their data. And typically I work with MUFON data, and I show the difference on this story. I wrote about this. But otherwise, we have a couple other interesting sightings up there.
Wait a minute, before you move on from that. So can anyone find these images you're talking about that they're being voted on?
Oh, yeah.
These maps,
I wrote a story about it that you can find at openminds.tv. I found out about it through a story on this website called Bustle, which I linked to, and I do recommend people look at this article. It was a good article. Even though they missed the point for the population thing that's so important. And then in both of our articles, I've got embedded pictures and links to these maps. And I encourage people to click on the links, because you got to click out the link to do the interactive part where you can click on these things and everything. And that also takes you to their site where you can vote on your favorite map, whether you like Pooja's map or Adams. But both of these are very impressive. These people are really talented, and they've created these just cool, typically we have these what's called infographics, right? They're these graphics with a bunch of information on them, but these are interactive where you can hover over things and it actually accesses the data and gives you information back. So
wow,
really cool stuff.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of work. I wonder what Maine looks like. We have like 400 people here. Yeah, not too many people here.
400.
We have more moose, maybe more than 400. We definitely have more moose than people.
I've never heard of a moose
sighting. We know there was a deer sighting. Or dog sighting. There's dog sightings. But I can't
tell you. Let's see where they fit, because at least the last time I did one in 2014. When MUFON still had really regular data coming out, and I did every state. They've been a little bit. I used to have access to more data from the MUFON database. Now it's harder to get, but they do send out email fairly regularly with their sighting numbers, and that's usually what I'll record to get the numbers.
Well, we do actually have
Maine fits.
We do have 1.3 million. I just looked. Of course, I'm teasing about the 400 people.
But you're number 39 when it comes to the number of sightings. But if you go per capita, you're number 9 in 2014.
Wow.
Whoa.
That's impressive.
Lots of UFOs in Maine.
Hey, I have I have on in the chat room online a supporter who's been with me from the beginning. And he wanted me to...
And they still like you.
I know. He wanted me to ask you a question. He wants me to ask you, what's your comment? Have you listened to the Joe Rogan DeLong interview?
I haven't, but because I don't want to, because I don't know. And I've explained this, I guess, before, and I could see how maybe people might be confused by that, because I am not so impressed or I don't have that much interest in Tom DeLonge's speculation. I'm not as into speculation. We hear all day, every day, and Lee will tell you this and get all emotional about it, and it'll be a lot of fun. But
I can't wait. Yeah.
we hear speculation from all the time, and the way Lee always puts it, unless you can show me something, then I know it means nothing to me. And that's exactly, you're wasting my time. And, for people like us who are writing stuff, we're not like the UK tabloids where we're going to say, Tom DeLonge thinks that aliens are bad and the government's fighting with aliens. I've talked to Tom personally, and he's a great guy. I love this guy. And a lot of my friends have different ideas about UFOs. You have your ideas. Lee has his own ideas. But, I'm not going to write a story about it. Here's what Martin thinks about UFOs, or here's what Lee thinks, I would rather write about what you can prove or what, and that's what I'm interested about, what Tom DeLonge has done. He has gotten together, as we've talked about, some of the, these high-ranking people that are extremely impressive, that have worked in intelligence, and we've never had these sort of people. That's the one I'm interested in. And because of their credibility, what they have to say is what I'm really interested in. And so that's what I'm mostly interested in. So when he is trying to tell Joe Rogan about what he believes or what he says he's been told by people who we have no idea who these people are yet, that's going to be a tough sell. So I can understand why Joe Rogan would not take him seriously. And, even for myself, Tom's a great guy. I really like him, but he has yet to produce, and he knows this, he has yet to produce these alleged witnesses who have told him some of the more fantastic ideas. Because you've spoken with Chris Mellon, who's one of the people that's part of his academy. I've spoken with some others in that group, and they're very conservative. In fact, I had John Alexander on recently, and he's friends with a lot of these guys, and they have very similar perspectives, and they have had careers in the government. And although they're highly interested in UFOs, and they believe that there's a true mystery here, and people inside the government do believe that at times, they have not seen any evidence of some major, cover-up or secrecy to the level that Tom is talking about. So they themselves are like, wow, I'm not aware of what Tom's talking about, but if he does have these insiders telling them this, we're interested in hearing that as well. So that's why, Tom isn't the one I'm listening to. When people say Tom said this and Tom said that, that's great. But you know what? Tom is a rock star. He's a cool dude. But if he had spent a career in the CIA like Chris Mellon or some of these other people in the group, then I would be much more interested in his personal opinions, and ideas.
Sure. Good answer. All right.
So hopefully that makes sense.
It does.
And it is important to remember, like when it comes to the Nimitz case, a lot of these people in the media started picking up on this case. That's great that Chris Mellon talked about, but they're saying Tom DeLonge talked about this, and this came up in Tom DeLonge's press conference, and they're crediting the wrong person because it doesn't hold as much weight when a rock star talks about some alleged Navy UFO case. But when you have a guy from, who worked in defense intelligence and held very high positions, and he's talking about the importance of a case that the Navy jets were scrambled to chase, then that holds a lot more weight. And that, I think, it's something that we really need to pay attention to.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, anything else real quickly?
No, I've got a couple other cases out. We've got at openminds.tv, including a couple with videos. So I'd love people to go over there and take a look and see what they think. In one case, I'm pretty sure they're balloons, but not quite sure. But it's always really helpful for people to take a look and share their opinions, because then we can figure out whether these things are truly mysterious or not. And in fact, we haven't really come up with a conclusion on the red blob. Remember the red blob?
Oh, yeah, I do remember the red blob.
Yeah.
The Red Blob. It was called
Red Blob.
The movie The Blob. It was
yeah,
that was scary. Blob's going to take over the
scary
world.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Lee's old enough to remember that movie, so careful.
He might have starred in
it.
No,
he probably won't. He might have some PTSD when he was a kid and he got scared by it. So
all right,
be careful.
All right, Alejandro, thanks so much. And,
all right,
and I'll talk to you. I'll talk to you on your show on Monday, and I'll see you here next week at the same time.
All right.
All right. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. I know. Okay, Lee Spiegel. How are you, Lee? Don't forget.
Well, I am the original Blob, of course.
I thought you might like that. Yeah.
And yes to Alejandro, my dear Alejandro. I'm way old enough to remember those movies. In fact, I love those old movies more than anything that's coming out now. One of my all-time favorites is Earth versus the Flying Saucers. Oh my God, I can't tell you how many times I've watched that movie. I mean, I have the dialogue memorized. I mean, and boy, love it in black and white. It just, there's so much stuff from the past, and I'm kind of dealing with a lot of these things now in this project that I'm working on with James Fox. We're going back historically, and we've come up with some amazing historical things. And David Marla, have you had David on your show yet, by the way,
yes.
Martin?
Oh, he was one of my favorites.
Wow, he is like such a wealth of archival information, and he has news clippings from all around the country that go back to the early 1940s, things I've never seen before, that when you put them all together and you kind of stack them on top of each other and you show them throughout this documentary that we're working on, oh my gosh, the stuff is quite dramatic. It's like it's almost as good as, if not better in some cases, as modern day computer generated effects on TV. Because the original newspaper headlines are the originals. This was the real stuff. And I'm just astonished at the stuff that David has in his archive. It's like hats off to him.
Wow. Hey, I know I thought Dave was fantastic, and I've been trying to get him back on. He was, at the time, last time I spoke with him, he was working on the L.A. incident, the 1940, whatever it was. Doing a lot of work on that one.
Yeah, they refer to it as the Battle of Los Angeles.
That's what I just couldn't remember what it was. Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to be showing some interesting images from that event, and it was things like that got the public all riled up. At around the same time that the pilot Kenneth Arnold made his report about the 9 delta-shaped discs that he saw flying over Mount Rainier, and shortly after that we had this incident in Roswell, New Mexico, and then a few years later the big UFO flap over Washington D.C., where groups of objects flew and were seen from the ground and also tracked on radar and chased by military jet fighters. These objects, the biggest concern that they presented to us was that they were flying in what's considered totally restricted airspace. They were flying in the restricted air corridors over the White House and the Capitol. That's a no-no. You can't do that, and not expect to have somebody come and try and shoot you down. After you have first been asked politely to please leave this restricted airspace.
Right. And
yes.
Also, were they? What is it that the device that an airplane has on it now that can be tracked easily? I can't remember what it's called.
Oh, I don't know.
But I just wondered I wondered how long they've been around, and because now if it's some type of beacon that's in every commercial or any type of airline, that so they can identify it, and I just wonder how far back that goes. It probably doesn't go back that far.
Oh, I'm not sure because I don't keep up with that part of the technology, the aviation technology. I'm much more concerned, literally, with individual reports by people like pilots, military and commercial pilots, which is not to say that I'm not interested in civilian reports, and I'm not saying that I find them more or less reliable than anyone else. It's the people who I really like to look at and talk to and interview are the ones who primarily they're kind of responsible for our public safety in the skies. And if they encounter things in the skies that are unconventional, unexplained, that can't be figured out, and such has been the case for decades, then yeah, I want to talk to these people who are piloting these airplanes. And I have talked with many pilots, and these people are down to earth, and pilots who see things that they can't explain, they definitely would rather not report it.
Oh, yeah.
Because there's so many reasons, as you know. The job security is one main issue, as well as ridicule, and it's like, are these really the friendly skies that we're flying through? The thing that I like to tell people, Martin, is, I hate to say this, but it is true. We don't seem to have a lot of cases where these unexplained objects have basically pulled the first trigger. They don't seem to show initial aggression toward humans. It's always the humans that have the attitude of shoot first and ask questions later. Always. I think that's historical or historic. That's the kind of species we are, and it may be one of many reasons why any possible interplanetary society or group of planets, maybe they haven't wanted to invite us into their club, because we don't show any indication that we are a peaceful planet down here. I mean, sorry to say, but it's true.
Yeah. That's one of the things. One of Stan Friedman's mantras. Phil in the chat room reminded me, it's called a transponder, is what I was trying to. The word I was searching for. Okay. God, I hate that when I can't remember something. So yeah. Hey, Lee, so a large portion of these people know who you are. You've been on my show. Last time you were on, I think it was July. But can you just give, for the person that's listening to you for the first time, a little quick nutshell background about you, and then you can end out on what you're up to now, and we could talk a lot more about that.
All right. Well, I kind of jumped into all this back in the 1970s. The thing that first caught my attention about UFOs was in 1973, there was a whole wave of sightings around the country. And for some reason, back then, the news media actually was reporting on these, because otherwise I never would have found out about some of these stories. And I was particularly captivated by one that to me still remains to me one of the best, most credible ever close encounters with a UFO. And this was something that was experienced over Ohio in 1973 by a 4-man crew in an Army helicopter. And they weren't at very high altitude, but they all noticed at the same time that there was a light coming at them in the distance from the horizon, and it was like a red light, and they suddenly realized it was getting closer and closer and closer, and it was picking up speed, and they actually assumed it was on a collision course with them, whatever this thing was. And so they all braced for impact. And instead of colliding with the helicopter, the thing just stopped directly in the air, directly above them. There was no collision. And it had this glow about it. It shined a green light inside the helicopter cockpit. Everything was bathed in this light. And they could see the reflection from the light. They could tell very easily it was a cigar shape. It had no wings, had no tail, no horizontal or vertical stabilizers that you would expect on any kind of flying aircraft like that. It made no sound. It just hovered there in the sky above them. Now, again, this is coming from almost a collision course velocity to just stopping on a dime. And while they watched it, suddenly they felt their helicopter being pulled up as if, we laugh about this, but Star Trek, Star Wars, we all know the phrase tractor beam because we hear about these things all the time. It's part of science fiction. Well, this tractor beam thing grabbed the helicopter, pulled them up, and they were watching their altimeters, and they went several thousand feet up straight in a matter of seconds.
Several thousand feet up?
Yeah.
Was it that much? Wow.
Then there was a bump, and the UFO let them go, and the UFO took off, and these guys landed, and they contacted headquarters and said, listen, we're going to the authorities about this, or we're going to the press because we're not keeping quiet about this. Plus, there was at least one group of eyewitnesses on the ground who had seen this thing happen. And so they were allowed to speak to the press. And literally about a week later, I first became aware of the fact that the commander of the helicopter, Captain Larry Coyne, was going to be a guest on the old Dick Cavett show. Oh yeah, the late night talk show, and I watched it, and I was just so mesmerized by this guy's story that, I mean, nobody was really coming out of the woodwork saying, "Oh well, what they probably really encountered was the planet Jupiter." And you expect that all the time. And they were just amazing. So this totally grabbed me, and I thought, well, I want to know more about this stuff. And I started reading books. So this was like in the mid to late 1973 and into 74. And it occurred to me that I would really like to hear from more people like this helicopter pilot. And I think the public would like to hear of these kinds of experiences that are so hard to explain, and without me taking an attitude of conspiracy, lying, cover up. I never really was into that attitude or into that head. I just wanted to find out whatever I could. And one of the books that I read at the time was called Beyond Earth, Man's Contact with UFOs, and it was written by a couple, Ralph and Judy Blum. And I was really into this book because they gathered a lot of interesting people like the helicopter commander Larry Coyne, and astronauts, politicians, other military people, psychiatrists, psychologists, law enforcement officers, and I was reading the quotes from the book, and I thought, boy, I'd like to meet this guy, Ralph Blum, and tell him that I've come up with a possible idea that would involve his book, if he's interested in this. And my idea was, I'd like to hear the voices of these people. And it occurred to me, and this was back in the mid to late 70s. I don't know if many people in your audience, Martin, would even remember this, but back then, CBS did this thing with, they did these early television infomercials where they were putting out not just products like great flashlights and ways to decontaminate your home if you call in now. They were actually promoting record albums, vinyl record albums, the best hits of Mitch Miller and the Gang, or the best hits of 101 Million Strings, great hits of the 60s. And I thought, boy, this would be great because they're actually advertising these recordings on TV, getting people to call in. And again, this was literally before there was an internet. And so I thought, boy, it'd be great to put a record together, like a documentary. So the only way that I really could figure out how to do this was to meet Ralph Blum, the author of this book. And all that I knew about where he was that he was working out of an office at NBC in New York. He was involved with helping NBC do a special news report on UFOs that featured many of the people in his book. So I thought, well, I've got to go meet this guy, Ralph Blum, somehow. I want to see if I can get him to want to do something with me about UFOs. And so I literally one day went to NBC and noticed right away that you can't just walk through NBC. The security was tough then. You can imagine what it's tough now to try and get through the security of a company like this. So I walked into the lobby and noticed that there was a large group of people milling around near the security desks. And I heard somebody mumble like, "Oh, this is really great. I've always wanted to see a TV show." And I asked them what they were there to see. And they were there for an NBC tour, and they were going to see a live presentation of Jeopardy, because that's where Jeopardy was done back then. So I just waited and looked kind of innocent. And when the group was ushered through security to get onto one of the elevators to go upstairs for their tour, I just joined the group. I just blended in. Went right through security. Nobody asked me any questions, and got into the elevators and followed the group and went in to see Jeopardy. I figured, well, while I'm in here, I might as well go check out the show because this might be kind of fun. So I did that, saw a couple of tapings of the show, and then when the show was over and the ushers brought us out into the halls, they said, "Now we're going to finish our tour of NBC News. So make sure you stay in line, stay with the group, don't mingle or don't kind of wander off." And the group went down one hall, and I wandered off down another hall.
Oh, jeez.
That's exactly what I did. And I started going through one office after another, anything that was indicated by a sign on the door that said newsroom or news something or other. And finally I found a room, and I said, "Is this the right office room for Ralph Blum?" And they said, "Yeah." I said, "Oh, okay, great. I'm here to pick up his mail for him and take it to him."
Oh my God.
And that silence was brought to you by my late father, who, when I told him the story, eventually he went, "Yes, that's my son." So
wow.
Without asking me any more questions, they gave me Ralph Blum's mail, which of course gave me his address.
Oh my God.
In New York City. And they wrapped it up for me and put a rubber band on it and put it in an envelope. And I thanked them more than they could ever know. And off I went up to the upper east side of New York, and I found the building that was the I guess it was the correct address from some of the mail, and I rang his buzzer because his name was downstairs, and there was no answer. So I rang the buzzer for the superintendent, and the guy came out, and I said, "Hey, hi, I'm a friend of Mr. Blum's. I'm just here to deliver some mail for him. Can I leave it with you? And will you get it to him?" And he said, "Sure." So I wrote a little note on a piece of paper. "Dear Mr. Blum, my name is Lee Spiegel. I'm not here just to deliver your mail, but I love your book. I have an idea that I'd like to talk to you about regarding UFOs. I hope I'll hear from you someday." And I wrote my telephone number, and I gave it to the super, and off I went. Like 2 days went by, and my phone rang, and I picked it up, and I said, "Hi," and he said, "Is this Lee Spiegel?" I said, "Yeah, who's this?" He said, "My name is Ralph Blum. How did you get my mail?"
Oh my God. Couldn't you realistically go to jail for doing something like that? I mean,
oh yeah, of course, but you do things. There's a famous line in the first Indiana Jones movie, the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where Marion and Sala are asking Indy, how's he going to do this next thing that he's going to do, and he says, "I don't know. I'm just making it up as I go along." and
wow.
that's what I was doing.
Yeah,
we met. He loved the story of how I got his mail, and not long after that, Ralph and I found ourselves in an office at CBS doing a pitch to the CBS Records brass, and basically the pitch was, I would like to produce and write a vinyl recording documentary about UFOs, and we've already talked with Ralph's publisher at the time was Bantam Books, and Bantam wants to get on board. And the idea was, when you sell the record, you say to your possible customers, if you don't like the record, keep the book as our gift. And so part of the deal was, and they let me do this, I wanted a television commercial to sell my album, because that had never been done before. You'd never seen anything like that. No big companies of that magnitude had ever gone on the air and tried to promote a UFO product. So I figured, well, I better put a good product together. And so I ended up going out around the country, interviewing so many of the people that were in Ralph's books, astronauts, really people in politics, law enforcement, military. Like I mentioned before, we put this whole thing together. They let me write the 2-minute TV spot for it. We produced the spot in New York, and it went out on TV. It was unbelievable, Martin, to see this thing on TV.
Do you have did you ever get that recorded? I mean, do you have a recording of that?
Of the commercial?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I've got it.
Oh, God, I'd love to see that.
Yeah, I actually have been thinking that what I really need to do, I've got so many tapes that I need to convert to digital, including hundreds of tapes that I've done all my old interviews on, and I have that original TV commercial spot on an old VHS tape. So I just need to be able to transfer it to digital, and it'll be there. It'll be preserved. But yeah, I've got it. And when I look at it now, it's so odd to see it, because it looks to me now out of date 42 years later.
Wow.
So that was the first thing that I did. And one of the people who I met, who I became longtime friends with while I was working on the album, was Dr. J. Allen Hynek. And Allen Hynek, one day while I was in the middle of doing the album and producing and collecting interviews, he called me up and from Evanston, Illinois, where he was the director of the Center for UFO Studies. And again, little quick background. For about 22 years, Dr. Hynek was the absolute scientific spokesperson for the United States Air Force, for the Air Force's Project Blue Book, which was the official. It lasted for more than, well, it was like 30 years, from the 40s into the 60s. This was the official military investigation of UFOs, and every time there was any kind of major sightings anywhere, the Air Force would send Dr. Hynek, who was a known scientific skeptic about UFOs. They would send him to the places and basically say to him, make this go away. We don't want any more public alarm over this. Just quiet it down and then move on to the next case. And he did that. And he ended up hating the fact that he had to do that, because along the way, when he started realizing that the Air Force was doing inept investigations about UFOs, and he started changing his mind, he also realized that many of his scientific colleagues were turning against him, because he thought that there really was something about UFOs that should have been investigated by science. And so he and I became friends. And as I said, one day I was working on my record album, and he called me and he said that he wanted to ask me a favor. He was getting these phone calls from police officers and highway patrolmen, sheriff's deputies down in Lumberton, North Carolina. They were seeing some strange object in the sky several nights in a row, and they were asking his help to investigate it. He had no investigator down there, so he said to me, I know you're busy working on your documentary, but do you have the time to go down there and maybe do some interviews for me with the police officers and just put a report together and send me the report. And if you come back with some really good stuff, I'll publish your findings through the Center for UFO Studies. So I asked him, what are these people reporting? And he said, well, it's something different than we've ever seen these days. Here in 1975, they're reporting something that's triangular shaped or boomerang shaped. And we haven't really had a lot of reports like that. And I said, wait a minute, are you telling me that you want me to go down to North Carolina and basically try and see a flying Dorito? Because that's what this thing sounded like. And I said, I'd much rather see a classic flying saucer if I'm going to see anything at all. And he started to say, well, look, if you don't want to go. And I said, no, don't complete that thought, because there is no way in the world that I am going to piss you off because of who you are and that you've asked me to do this. I'm going. Just on the off chance of getting some good interviews. You bet I'll go. And within a few hours of my arrival in North Carolina in April of 1975, I hit the jackpot. And I believe you're showing part of that jackpot on your YouTube channel right now.
I am.
Yeah.
The painting.
This is a painting of the most dramatic moment of the encounter. And for those of you who are looking at this, you can see one particular figure in the middle with his arms outstretched. Yep, yours truly. And this whole thing started where the calls started coming into the dispatcher's office, and we got into the sheriff's cars, following each other through car radios, finally coming upon this field. Everybody got out of the cars, and this thing started from behind where the trees are that you can see there in the painting. And it was a field, a big field in between where the trees were and where we were standing. And this thing first appeared over the trees, moving slowly from left to right, just flashing a white light and a red light, and then back to white and red. And then it stopped at one point above the trees, and then it started moving slowly across the field in our direction. So we're just standing there watching and waiting. We didn't know what it was going to do. And it got to the point where it was directly above us, just like you see in the painting. And at that point, we could see there was a row of like white lights up one side of it, a row of like red lights up the other side with a brighter light at the apex. But it was because of the brightness of these lights that we could actually make out the triangular shape of the thing. It made no sound. It had no engine, nothing at all. No visible means of propulsion whatsoever here in 1975, rural North Carolina. And as we watched it, all of a sudden, this beam of light came straight down from it and hit the ground right in front of us. It was only on the ground maybe 2 seconds, 3 seconds, certainly long enough for my heart, which was pounding out of my chest. And the light went back up, and then the entire object turned an amber color, the whole thing. It slowly turned about like 45 degrees, and then very slowly moved away, as if to say, I'm done with you guys. I'm going somewhere else to screw around with someone else's head at this point. And we got into the cars, and again, through car radios, we came upon different law enforcement officers who had just had their own close encounter with this thing. And probably the most dramatic of them, which ended up in my report, was I came upon a police chief who was in his car patrolling a lake, and I went over to where he was sitting in the car, and I said, all right, Chief, what did you see? He said, I was just sitting in here, and the whole inside of my car lit up, just totally lit up. And I looked out the window, and there was this thing just sitting in the sky above me. And I said, all right, what did you do next? He said, I got out of the car, I opened up my trunk, pulled out my big official police lantern that we use for emergencies. I aimed it up at the thing, and I blinked once at it, and the thing blinked back at me.
Jeez.
I said, oh.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. So I said, all right, well, Chief, did anything else happen? He said, yeah. I blinked at it again twice, and it blinked back to me twice. So, and what I want to say also about this, Martin, is that years later, when I was at a UFO conference out in California, I happened to meet up with one of the leading UFO skeptics, debunkers in the world. And I don't mind saying who it is. It's Robert Schaefer. Mm-hmm. I've known Robert for many years. I respect a lot of what he does and a lot of what he says because I think skepticism is really important. I don't think ridicule is, and it has no place at all in the study of anything, whether it's UFOs, Loch Ness Monster, unexplained phenomena, anything. Ridicule is the last thing you want to inflict on people who believe they've had a very special experience with something. So I'm at this UFO conference, and we ran into each other, and I said, Robert, I've been meaning to tell you about something that happened to me back in 1975. Let's go somewhere and sit where it's quiet, and I'll tell you. I laid out the whole story to him, and when I was done, I said, so, all right, Robert, you heard the story. What do you think I saw that night? And he said, well, if you haven't changed the details of the story in all these years, and I said, no, I haven't. And there's corroborating eyewitnesses about this. He said, the only thing that I can think of that would fit the facts is that what you saw was a remote-controlled kite.
It's pretty good with lights, too.
I said, Robert, remember, it was nighttime. It came across a field and knew where we were. It, at the right moment, shined the beam of light. How did it then get from where we were to where this police chief was? And how did it know that he was going to be blinking up at it? And what was he blinking back at it? I mean, doesn't this kind of sound more like an individual intelligence going on here instead of some yokel with like an old initial, I don't know, prototype Radio Shack kite? Because I mean, who had this kind of stuff back then?
Right.
And the other thing, Martin, is since you know David Marler. David Marler is a really amazing researcher. He put together the most definitive book a few years ago on triangular UFOs. And we didn't know each other until after the book was published, and we finally met and have become friends. And he told me that based on his independent research into many triangular UFO sightings around the United States, the one that I was involved with was the first multiple witness, well-documented, close encounter of a triangular UFO in the United States.
Wow.
I didn't know this, of course, while it was happening. I mean, even Alan Hynek, when he sent me down there, he said, we haven't heard much about triangular UFOs. And this was 1975. This was like 22 years before the Phoenix Lights.
Right. Now, I have a friend who had an encounter with a triangle in 1978.
Oh, where was it?
That was in Massachusetts.
Oh, no kidding.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. So I mean,
was it at a low altitude where he was?
It was a woman, and she was she was a teenager at the time, and she was riding with her aunt, and they stopped the car, and she said, she got out, and but it was right over their car, and I think she said the thing about the no noise too. I'm going to talk to her again about it, but she said it was in the paper. afterwards. You know, I mean, other people saw it. There was other witnesses.
Yeah, it's so much more frequent now. You said it was 1978, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, then she saw, like I did, one of the early triangular UFOs. It was like well, the visitors, whoever they are, they were using a new model in those years.
Yeah, I've had people say that to me on this show. You know, so why is it? You know, why have they changed? Why are there, you know, the orbs, the cigar shape, the triangle, the saucer? What is the saucer out of fashion now? You know, but people do see discs still. You know, it's not like they're extinct or anything. Well,
you know, there's another thing that I like to point out to people. And I was leading up to this as well. This all happened in 1975. The encounter, putting my album together, and the helicopter pilot Larry Coyne was one of the people that I put on the album, and it was about this time that I was feeling like, okay, well, I've done this record album, and that was nice, and it's helped people to understand a little bit more about UFOs. But now what's next? What can I do now that is maybe new? And I thought, boy, somebody really ought to do something at the United Nations. I mean, because really, this is not just an American phenomenon. This is something that's happening all around the world. So, you know, people said to me, this was at the beginning of 1978, people said, you can't just go up to the United Nations, knock on the door, and say, "Hi, may I please come in and do a UFO presentation?"
Did you ask them what their mail, if they had any mail they needed delivered?
Yeah. Can I bring some mail tomorrow? And maybe then you talk to me. No, well, and the whole thing where that started was in 1977. Now, this was during the year leading up to Steven Spielberg giving us Close Encounters of the Third Kind, which became the big holiday movie of 1977. They just celebrated the 40th anniversary of that movie. But also in 1977, the Prime Minister of Grenada, a little Caribbean country of Grenada, Eric Gary, was making several speeches at the UN. He had a personal crusade. He had a passion about UFOs, so he claimed, and he wanted his country to become like the spotlight of tourism or whatever. And so he came up with an idea to try and get the other countries of the world to put together a committee that could study UFOs together and share this information, and have a committee be a clearinghouse set up in his country of Grenada, so that Grenada would always be now the focal point for UFOs. And I watched some of these things on the news about, well, the Prime Minister of Grenada is at it again. He spoke to the UN today, and UFOs, and as in the past, nobody's paying attention to him. So I thought, aha. I had one of those aha moments that, again, my father really liked. And I, as you probably know, all the major countries of the UN, they all have missions, their own offices, and they're all kind of located in and around the neighborhood where the United Nations is. It makes sense. So I knew that Grenada had its mission near the UN. I just looked it up, got its address, its phone number, and I made contact with a couple of the ambassadors there. And I introduced myself and said that I had recently produced a documentary record on UFOs, and I've been watching their prime minister talk at the United Nations about doing something about UFOs, but there doesn't seem to be any interest there with him about this. I have an idea of how I could get the United Nations to pay attention to your prime minister. May I come by your office, the mission, and give you a copy of my record album that you can then give to your prime minister and then see if he wants to talk to me. And that's what we did. We went over to their office. They were very friendly. They took the album. They said that they were going to get it down to him in Grenada. And I don't know how much time passed after that, but I got a call from them saying, the prime minister is going to be in New York next week. There's going to be a ceremony where he's going to be knighted and become Sir Eric Gary. And there'll be it's a big ceremony with lots of food and dignitaries. And we would like to invite you to come to the ceremony because the prime minister would like to meet you.
Wow.
I went great. Holy cow. I'll even wear a tie. I mean, really, I'll be happy to do that. Thank you. And I went there, and it was very cool to see that kind of ceremony happening there. And when it was all over, somebody brought me into a room, and then they brought the prime minister in, and we were introduced. We shook hands, and they left us alone. And he said that he really enjoyed my record album. And in fact, I think you've got a picture up right now on your site, showing the prime minister in the center of the screen. That was Sir Eric Gary, and he said to me, "Well, what is your idea of doing something at the United Nations?" And I said, "Well, Mr. Prime Minister, I've been watching your speeches, but with all due respect, the United Nations is not paying attention to you. You're not presenting credible reasons for them to take you seriously. If you liked the record album that I put together, then you know that I had voices on that album that if those voices were to somehow come together as a group, the media would listen. And if they came together as a group at the United Nations will listen. I can bring these people together if you will sponsor my presentation idea." And quite literally, at the end of that meeting, over a handshake, I suddenly became a delegate to Grenada because I had to. And I found out also that not only can you not just walk up and knock on the door at the UN and ask to do a presentation, if you want to do something there, you have to either be a member of a country that wants to do this presentation, or you have to be delegated, even temporarily, by the country so that you are allowed. They gave me a special card, an identification card of the country of Grenada, indicating that I was an advisor to the country. And I had to show this card whenever I wanted to go into the United Nations throughout 1978. And the card got me in almost everywhere. It was unbelievable.
Wow.
It was, I wanted to go up to people I knew and say, "Hello, please, can you pinch me? Because I can't believe my luck that this is actually happening." And what happened shortly after that, and I think this is also why I found out many months later that our State Department was watching what I was doing. After I made the deal with Grenada, I started getting checks from the United Bank of Grenada.
Wow.
Because they paid me not a salary, because I was working a night job in New York. But
all right, everyone, thanks so much for listening. And the rest of the show gets pretty interesting. We have a couple of callers an hour or two. Remember, you can support the show for only $2 or more a month to listen to full shows plus archives. We'll be back next week with Jeremy Corbell. Should be an interesting show. And thanks again for listening. And remember to keep your eyes to the sky.